Hi, my name is Christopher Smith with Lantern News. Today I'll be interviewing Victor Orlando, who is running for New Hampshire's 2nd Congressional District. We'll be discussing policies he plans on bringing to Washington. Victor, good to have you.
Good to be here.
So, jumping right into the policy questions here.
Sure.
Given the economic crisis, in regards to lower class and middle class Americans, what are some policy changes you would support to address this issue?
Yeah, so I'm looking at the economic crisis as a specifically an affordability crisis, right? Um, and then there's also an economic opportunity crisis on top of that. So there's large overarching things that are kind of just inflationary in most cases, and then there's also little things specifically for different areas. So, uh, for example, our government spending being out of control. I think, when I was a kid, the budget, $1 trillion budget was crazy. Now we're almost at $10 trillion a year. We're looking at deficits increasing $2 trillion a year, soon to be 40 trillion total. And a lot of that spending obviously has created an inflationary environment. This is an overarching theme. Uh, but part of the other issues with that are just simply the costs of everything. We look at how much our food's costing right now, and people can't afford it. I mean, I know my own background. I've had the unfortunate happenings where I've gone to the grocery store and I've had to buy stuff and I've had to put stuff back because I didn't have enough money for it.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to look at those crises individually. So if we look at food, for example, a lot of it has to do with the input costs going into the food. Um, we're very, very heavily dependent on foreign fertilizers and foreign herbicides, pesticides, insecticides. I believe RFK quoted 97% of our glyphosate comes from China, which is just absolutely insane. Um, but then we also got to look at how many companies are producing these different things from like the seeds. When we look at crops, we don't really think about input costs like we do with a car, right? Like with a car, steel goes up. Okay, yeah, the car will go up. But we're not really talking about the price of seeds or the monopolies controlling the seed production and how they're essentially increasing their price at a set rate every year because they want to continue to increase profits and different things like that. So I'd pursue a policy where we're essentially attacking those specific issues on the individual issue task and also the overarching spending and inflation controls. I know specifically with a very, very big inflationary pressure we're getting right now is the demand for dollars. So we haven't really talked about this too much in the press, but foreign demand for dollars is at an all-time low. Now, some of that is the fact that they're looking at us like, hey, it's backed by nothing but the United States government, and they don't seem to know how to balance a budget. That's a huge point of it. Another huge aspect of it is we seem to be getting a little sanction happy uh, with every single foreign country. And we have to look back at the Cold War. We made and wrote international banking laws, essentially saying that we will not do these things unless we're at direct war with this person because they create um, issues in terms of demand and they mess up the banking systems, for example, kicking Russia out of SWIFT, things like that. And what we're seeing is any country that isn't necessarily 100% Team USA or any billionaire oligarch or dictator in the third world is now looking at a lot of these things going, oh my God, I have billions upon billions of dollars in US dollars. I need to now divest from that and put it in different assets that the United States can't just shut off if I upset them. And we've seen our country being very, very willing to break our own rules that we wrote again in the Cold War. And now we're seeing the repercussions of us breaking those rules. So I pursue a policy where we go back to essentially a fair world order where we're basically saying, hey, we need to follow the rules we wrote and we need to come up with new peace agreements to basically say that we're not going to break international law whenever we feel like it because one country does something justified or unjustified, wrong or right, does something we don't like. So we're going to try and punish them that way. And again, this isn't necessarily sanctions, but this is specifically banking things and freezing foreign assets that we're not at war with. And that's a huge contributing factor to specifically the dollar drop in value. And I think that's something that no one's really talking about that we need to pursue.
You said affordability crisis, and you used another word. I wrote down growth, but that's not the term you
Yeah,
used.
so we're dealing with an economic opportunity crisis as
Opportunity
well.
crisis. That's
So
yes, yes.
the best example of this is actually the North Country in New Hampshire, where we're dealing with years upon years of exported American jobs to foreign countries, whether they be IT service jobs, call jobs, customer service jobs, or they be actual manufacturing jobs. Berlin's a good example. It used to be the paper mill capital of the world,
Hmm.
and now it is not. And we're seeing areas like that where the economic opportunity just isn't there.
Mm-hmm.
So where a lot of these people are willing to say, "Hey, I want to pin my ears back and just work and get the American dream," they're not giving those same opportunities. And that's actually something that's really important to me is that we start creating these economic opportunities again by building infrastructure, by focusing on at home infrastructure and factories and manufacturing and jobs here. Because if we have good economic growth in terms of economic opportunity, then the middle class and the poorer classes can say, hey, I can't afford to go to college, but I can still make 80 to 100K a year doing these other jobs. Or, hey, this college degree I got turns out wasn't all it was cracked up to be. No way I'm going to be able to afford to live, but I can still get these other jobs and I can still afford to feed my family.
Mm-hmm.
Because what I'm seeing, and this comes from a personal level and also from what I'm seeing from my neighbors, my friends, my family, there's a lot of people who don't want social assistance, who don't want welfare. They want to just be able to go out on their own as an independent adult and make a living and pay and provide for their family.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't give them economic incentives to do that, it it's never going to work. We're all going to be dependent on the government assistance,
Mm-hmm.
and no one actually wants government assistance. They want to be able to do it themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So if we don't give them the opportunity to do it themselves, well, we're not going to help with our spending because we're going to keep having to spend for more welfare, and we're not going to help with the economy because it's not going to grow, and these people aren't going to be able to contribute to the society and taxes. It's just a snowballing effect.
Mm-hmm.
The way I'd pursue policy to fix that is simply we'd set up economic opportunity for people to come here and manufacture here. Specifically with New Hampshire, I'd be negotiating directly with the lobbyists or directly with the people who are trying to get bills passed for fund spending and stuff and saying, hey, look, I need 1,000 jobs in Coos County. I need 500 jobs in Cheshire County. I need 1,000 jobs in Grafton. I'd be willing to work with you on this because we need it as a government, but I need something from my district to put jobs back in my district, to give economic opportunity back in my district.
Mm-hmm.
I need infrastructure in my district to sustain economic opportunity, specifically going up to Coos again. And right now, Coos County, it's an ember, right? It's not out completely. We still have the infrastructure up there, but that infrastructure is quickly crumbling. And that infrastructure is also only going to be there as long as we use it. And right now, we haven't used it since the paper mill's closed. So if we don't get up something up there soon, we're going to start seeing things fall apart, fall into disuse, or not be usable anymore. And then it's even harder to get it going again.
Okay. Moving on to the next issue here. Given the health crisis in regards to the rise of things like depression and anxiety and other issues, high obesity rates, what are some policy changes you would support to address the health crisis in America?
Yeah. So when we look at the health crisis, just to clarify, you're specifically referring to the health, like our healthiness, not health insurance, correct?
Correct. Yeah. I
Okay.
mean, yeah, yeah. Our yeah.
Because those are related issues, but they're also different. Health insurance kind of goes into more
But if you
affordability.
have something to highlight for health insurance, please. But yeah,
Yeah,
this specific, it's our own like physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, maybe
yeah.
health. Yeah.
So, all these things always tie back to each other, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
a big portion of that has to do with our food, right? What are we eating? And as I think RFK's done a very good job pointing out with Fruit Loops, for example,
Mm-hmm.
the ingredients list difference just between Canada to the United States or the European Union to the United States of how much more toxins are in the United States food. And those toxins have been designed to essentially make us not feel hungry, make us want to eat more, things like that. We can easily take care of at a federal legislative level. And also, we don't have to worry about the food companies trying to sue the FDA if we do something legislatively as opposed to through the signature of the FDA director or Health and Human Affairs director, RFK, right? Because they're using kind of executive authority to just do that. Where if we legislative do it, it's much harder for them to sue us and say, "Hey, we still want to put these toxic chemicals in the food." Where if we do it legislatively, they can't.
Sure.
There's also the whole point of when it specifically comes to depression, and I'm going to specifically go to drug use because that's a huge health problem. And I look at that stuff as that's a lot more to do with the opportunities in front of someone, right? And if we look at the opportunities we have, who are healthy people? Healthy people are people who can get fulfillment from their jobs, people who know they're making progress, people who know they can, tomorrow's going to be better than today. Who are depressed people or drug users? Those are people who look at tomorrow and say, tomorrow's going to be the same or worse than today. They're going in the wrong direction. And I look at that and I say, that's honestly what we did to our young people, our young generations, people my age and people even younger than me. We basically said, hey, do really good in school, work as hard as you can, then go to the best college that will let you in, get a huge student loan, pay for that college, follow a degree you love, and everything will work out. Um, that wasn't really true. We essentially tricked a few generations of people into doing these things, and now they have a giant debt load on their shoulders. And we're surprised when they're depressed because they did everything they thought they were supposed to, and now it's getting worse for them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of it has to do with say, hey, look, guys, we're going to accept the fact that that's not necessarily true. You don't necessarily have to go to college. You don't necessarily have to follow this process. And also, you definitely don't have to get giant student loans. Just go to the most expensive school you can. You can go to community college. You can go to state school. You can go to a trade school. You can pursue a job that, this may not be your dream job, but you can still do your dream as a hobby on the side and then do this to pay the bills and to make money. And we need to have those conversations with people. And we also need to rework our federal grant system so that people can apply for different things, whether it be going to trade school. Some people, college isn't right for them. And if we force them into that bracket because they don't have enough money to go to trade school, so they go to college instead because they can get a student loan for college, but no student loan for trade school, they're not going to be happy the rest of their lives. They're going to be miserable. And that goes back to the depression and the health and all that other stuff. The other thing is we have to encourage them and we have to really get some of the actual research done that's going to help these people. The federal government's spending billions upon billions on research. And some of that research, I think Rand Paul spoke about it. They're giving cocaine to bats to see what happens. I mean, I'm sure there's someone who pitched a really good argument about why giving cocaines to bats would be so helpful to humans. But why don't we start spending some of that money on doing some research into different studies, like actually finding out what effects some of these pesticides have on people, actually finding out what high sugar diets or low sugar diets or some of all these fad diets actually do, doing some more research into that stuff so that we can tell people, hey, this is our recommendation instead of just having it move with the fads. Like I love what RFK did with the food pyramid, but if I'm going to be devil's advocate here, RFK is using the research he's looked at to address that. And we've had 20, 30 years of the old food pyramid that people were trying to do what's healthy and they're following, but now that wasn't the right thing. Well, I think we need to do our best to make sure that the current food pyramid is the right thing and do some more research into that to make sure that is. And again, that's something the federal government can do. And then we also go back to a specific big deal for me is specifically tick-borne illnesses. And with tick-borne illnesses, especially in New Hampshire, there's a lot of people walking around who don't even know they have any. One tick bite could devastate you the rest of your life, especially if it goes undiagnosed. So one of the big things I want to do is specifically for children, because I look at adults as if you're an adult, you should be able to kind of take care of yourself to a certain extent. But specifically with children is we have $25 little tick-borne illness tests we can do where it's just a quick dab of a finger and we can do a quick like a PCR test for COVID or like a diabetes test and quickly say, hey, these aren't 100% accurate, but if they come up positive, hey, we send you to your doctor, you do more evaluations. But we do that to kids twice a year, their entire school career. We can catch a bunch of these illnesses before they progress and become worse and worse. Because one of the issues of a lot of these tick-borne illnesses is they just sound like normal aches and pains, and most people don't give these type of symptoms any credit. Like, oh, I had a headache this morning. I get a headache every couple days, every once in a while. That could be a tick-borne illness. Oh, my joints hurt today. That could be arthritis, early onset arthritis from a tick-borne illness. Oh, whenever I have steak, I get really nauseous. And people just adapt to these issues instead of saying, hey, oh, these could be problems. Well, the only way we're going to find if those were tick-borne illnesses is if we start testing for them. And I think a lot of that has to do with screening and doing a lot of this testing to make sure that people aren't getting these diseases and we can catch them earlier.
Moving on. How about abortion? This has been, a topic more so like I like to try to catch like a broad audience, and I know especially like the progressive movement and the Democrats. This is still a key issue for them. Dobbs v. Jackson overturned the precedent set by Roe v. Wade. Where are you on abortion?
Yeah, so I think it's where it is right now, and it's where it belongs in the states' rights. The main issue, I believe, debated in the current, I forgot the name, you just said it out loud, I'm sorry, but Dobbs versus Jackson,
Jackson, yeah.
uh, was specifically whether or not the federal government rather, has the constitutional authority to restrict or unrestrict it. And I believe it, based on what the Constitution says, which is what gives our federal government authority or not, it doesn't say anything about abortion. So then that goes with the states' rights. And I believe most states, specifically New Hampshire, I think they've done a good job with that. And I believe it needs to stay in the states' rights.
All right. How about your thoughts on age verification? This issue's I feel like it's kind of snuck in there recently on like different software, like operating systems and such. A lot of age verification for like, it's supposed to be done to protect minors, is what a lot of people are claiming. What are your thoughts on the age verification legislation?
Oh, that's interesting. I haven't seen it done effectively anywhere, really, to be
Mm-hmm.
honest. Uh, I don't really know if there is an effective way to do it. It seems like the younger the kids, the better they are with technology, the better they are at just bypassing it. I know the "Are you 18 or older?" question is kind of, it's not really, doesn't really do anything, because I don't know anyone who wants to go to that site is going to say yes, I'm, or no, I'm not 18. If they're not 18, they're just going to say yes, and they're going to go on anyway. Um, I will say protecting our minors or people basically below 18, anyone who's not an adult, should be the top priority of our country. I mean, that is legitimately the future of our country, is everyone who's under 18. And we do need do a better job of protecting them from parasitic uh, algorithms and stuff like that that specifically hijack their brain and hijack the reward punishment factors in their brain to essentially get them addicted to this stuff, whether it be a psychological addiction, which is what it is. And it's not chemical, but it's psychological. And we've seen it where it messes up their brain. We see increases in anxiety, we see increases in depression with more use of social media and stuff like that. But at the same time, I look at some social media like YouTube. YouTube is an incredible, incredible resource, because I can literally look up, hey, I'm 16. I have this weird thing wrong with my car and I want to fix this part.
Mm-hmm.
And we can have a 16-year-old look up how to fix that on their own right now. And I also don't want to take that resource away from them, because that's a level of information that we have been blessed with that we need to take, and we should have distribution of. So, to be honest, I look at it kind of like, you know, I don't know if there's an effective way we can legislate that. And also, who's the one who decides what's okay for 18-year-olds or not okay for 18-year-olds?
Mm-hmm.
honestly, this, or rather, people under 18. This goes back to parental rights, and you know, this is stuff that their parents should be saying, "Hey, I'm going to give you a tablet or a phone or a computer." And the parents need to be policing their kids. The government doesn't have a right to police people's kids. That's the parents' job.
Next topic is going to be on federal government spending. You already touched on this a bit. Recently, I was looking at some numbers. Uh, the numbers that I saw, these could be a bit, rough estimate, but recently, like 2025, I think it was about a little over $7 trillion. And then the number I saw for 2019, so just before COVID, I think it was around 4.3 trillion. So yeah, we're getting close to like doubling, in 7 or so years here. On federal spending. You did mention it briefly, but do you want to add anything to that?
Sure, sure. Yeah. So the one, and I realized this about 2 weeks ago, and I realized we've been arguing. So the left and right argue about federal spending all the time. They always blame everyone else on it. The other side always blames the other side. That's just what it's been forever. And I've realized we've been arguing the wrong thing. So for one, we've always been blaming the presidents for this. We've blamed Bush, Obama, Trump, Biden, Trump again. That's not where the blame lies. The blame lies in our legislative branch. It lies in Congress and the Senate. Congress controls the power of the purse, period. They have the ability to make a balanced budget. They have the ability not to make a balanced budget. They decide. I don't care what a president wants when they want it. Congress decides the budget, period, stop. Because of that, as people, we need to look at ourselves and say, well, we keep electing these people who just keep spending and spending and spending. I mean, the term is spend like they're in Congress didn't come out of nowhere. So when we look at the spending problem, we see the right a lot of times will want to spend on military stuff or industry, and then the left wants to spend on like welfare stuff or subsidies, or sometimes they both want to spend on both. And what we see is instead of negotiating and cutting both of them, they negotiate and increase both of them. But even then, that's still the wrong argument we should be having. And I'm going to put it in a little bit of a metaphor, and I'm going to use the example of if you hire me to do a roof on your house and you pay me in full to do the roof, I never show up and do the roof. Next year comes. Are you then talking about do we pay him the same amount to do the roof again? Or do we give him less or do we give him more? And then someone's arguing, well, we should give him more because the first amount didn't get the roof done. And someone's
Oh,
arguing, oh, no, we should give him
yeah.
less because we don't have the budget because we already spent it on the roof in the first place. So the wrong argument. Argument should be, where's the roof we've already purchased? A lot of this stuff I've realized isn't about do we have enough money in the budget for it? It's about we already bought this stuff 10 times over. Where is it? Now, how do we combat this? Well, honestly, this has to go back to Congress tying things to it. So when Congress said, "Hey, we're going to give 100 billion or whatever the billion was for rural cell towers," and we got zero rural cell towers with that money, but all the money was spent. That's a problem. The way you combat that is you could say, okay, instead of having the federal government spend the money, we're just going to give it to the state. And the only condition the state's going to have is we need X number of towers built with that money. And if you do not get that many towers built with that money, you have to give it all back. And it has to be all because we need to force the states to do this. Now, I'm willing to work on timelines for things like saying, hey, we're going to give you this much money over this period because it's not realistic to think you can do it in this short of a period. But at the same time, we have restrictions like that and we do that, we'll actually see some stuff get done because the states aren't going to want to give back that money. And it'll also force them to do the things the money was designed for. And I think that's the biggest thing we're dealing with in Washington. It's not that we don't have enough money or we're spending too little, too less. It's where's the money we've already spent? And I can expand on this further if we look at Medicare, for example. It's healthcare for older people. And the total contribution of all Americans, the federal government, state government, and all charity organizations and keep in mind there's individual contributions to Medicare along with federal contributions. We spent a combined of $1.1 trillion in Medicare last year. That number is hard for me to even comprehend. And then I meet senior citizens who go to the doctor once or twice a year because they're relatively healthy. They pay into Medicare, plus the federal government pays into their policy too, and they can't even get a hearing aid.
Hmm.
And I look at that and I go, what the heck did we spend $1.1 trillion on? Where did it go? And that goes back to a lot of that is it's where did the money go? And the nice thing is the position I'm specifically running in for, which is Congress, that's the job I'm running for. It's to legislate, make these rules. It's also to audit and to get the budget fixed. And that's something I'm going to be working tirelessly on when I get there.
Next up, what's your stance on firearms? Do you like where we're at? Do you want to loosen things up a little more, tighten things up in certain areas?
Sure, sure. So the first thing I'm going to talk about the NFA a little bit.
Yeah, I'm
So
actually glad because in my mind, I was just thinking quickly, like, what was even like the last thing that happened with firearms, and it
yes,
was
they
in the
got
big
rid of the
beautiful
taxes
bill.
on the SBRs and
Yes,
silencers. So
yes,
people who don't know what an SBR is, it's just a rifle that has a short barrel.
yep,
So a little background on the NFA. The NFA was originally adopted because the government essentially wanted a revenue stream, and everyone was buying these new guns and these new silencers. So they were like, "Oh, we can tax these." Problem with the NFA in principle is the NFA is taxing a right. So this would be basically like if you were to have a protest sign and the government said, "Hey, you can protest, but if you want to protest, it's $100 every time you protest."
yeah. Or like if we want to have this interview, I gotta pay a tax or
Yes, you
something.
have
Yeah,
to
yeah,
pay $50 tax to
yeah,
have
yeah,
an interview with the free press. You
yeah.
can't tax a right. So that's the first issue with the NFA. The second issue I have with the NFA is it's had mission creep, where instead of being a tax, which is what it is by law, it's become a background check system. And the problem with that is it's background checking things that are just arbitrarily not safe or dangerous. They're just arbitrarily things. So, for example, a short barreled rifle, the rule is anything under 16 inches is a short barreled rifle. But anyone who knows anything about guns knows that the shorter the barrel, the less dangerous the gun is because the less velocity the bullet has. And that means the less energy it has. The less energy it has, the less deadly the bullet is. But they still do treat it that way just because they can. And then what's even crazier is the reason the number is 16 inches is because originally it was 18 and a half inches. But after the World Wars rather, we had the M1 carbine, which is a 16-inch barrel. They had millions of these things. And the government's like, we get rid of these. They sold them all off to civilians, only to realize after they sold them all, they violated their own NFA rules. So instead of saying the NFA was nonsense, they just simply changed it to 16 to give themselves a free pass. Then we look at suppressors. And honestly, we're the only country in the world that regulates suppressors because they're a benefit to everybody. A lot of people shoot in their backyards in New Hampshire, shoot at hunting at gun ranges, shoot in indoor ranges. All the suppressor does is it quiets the explosion level sound at the gun. There's two sounds you hear when a gun's shooting. You have the explosion of the initial explosion of the rounds of the gas. Hold on, my son just popped in the interview. Um, that's the explosion the silencer is quieting. Then you have I'm doing an interview, buddy. Go by your mama. Then you have the supersonic crack, and that's the sound you get of the bullet traveling faster than the speed of sound. The silencer doesn't do anything with the supersonic crack, so you still have that sound, but it helps with the explosion and the initial concussion at the firearm. What's nice about suppressors is it's safer for us. It helps your hearing. It's better for your neighbors because it's not going to be as annoying or loud. It's better when you're at a range because again, you don't get the concussion to the people sitting at the range next to you. There's no downside to them. And we are, for some reason, we're trying to regulate them probably because of Hollywood makes them sound like they're completely quiet. And that's not the case. Sorry about that. So, again, I look at these rules on these specific two instances. I go, what are these even for, right? And then I go into the rest of the NFA, and again, I go to the tax on a right thing. You should not have a tax on a right, and I would be all for getting rid of the NFA, um, just because again, you're taxing a right. It doesn't make sense. It's not. It doesn't work with our Constitution, and I think this is the same reason the Supreme Court has refused to take up cases on this because they don't want to have to get rid of the NFA because they know as soon as they hear it, they're going to because there's nothing constitutionally that it allows for that.
Mm.
Next thing specifically to do with Second Amendment stuff, and that's national reciprocity. So I'm for national reciprocity, mainly because you run into a lot of issues where someone would have a concealed carry permit in a different state and then tries to go to another state, and most states they have reciprocity of each other, but then this one state they don't. So the guy's driving through there, and legally, if you're driving through, you're allowed to still carry. You're just not allowed to stop. But let's say he stops because he's tired, so he stops at a motel, and next thing you know, because he stopped at a motel, now he's in violation. It just doesn't work. So having a national reciprocity rule, I think, would benefit a lot of people, and it would also help with a lot of safety. One of the things we've seen specifically with the FBI reports is that the more the states that have the concealed carry permits, the states that have less restrictive firearms rules, have an inverse effect on crime. I mean, there's less crime. And this again goes back to I have a grudge against the ATF specifically because it seems like the ATF doesn't go after any of the gangbangers with guns. It seems like they only go after the civilians with guns. I don't blame them. Gangbangers are scary, but I would love to see our federal agencies to do more against some of the gang crimes with guns, some of the illegal gun trafficking where we're seeing mafia or um, mob activity or any of the type of activity like that, where we see them transferring military grade stuff back and forth. I just don't see them regulating any of that stuff or going after it. I only see them going after civilians.
Are there any other policies? I mentioned I wanted to bring up, a handful of specific issues here, but is there any policy changes or issues that, you just want to address, kind of open floor?
Yeah, so there's a couple there's a few more. Obviously, I'm for term limits. That's all we got to talk about with that. That should be a no-brainer.
What,
But
what, for, let's start with like U.S.
sure.
House. What's for people in the House? How many terms could they serve?
Yeah, so the agreement I think floating around right now is they say it's three for the House and two for the Senate.
Okay.
Um, I'm not necessarily against doing four for the House and two for the Senate, or potentially doing six for the House so that the Senate and the House have the same years of service. But there needs to be a limit on there. There needs to be an age limit as well, or a cognitive limit for that matter. Um, but it's simple. Almost every American agrees on that. That's not really a controversial thing. One of the things I've been working with a couple different people throughout the country about is specifically uncapping the House. I know in New Hampshire specifically, we are blessed that we have a rep for every, I think, 3,000 to 3,500 people. So what that does is it forces that representative to do retail politics, meaning if you're only representing 3,000 people, you got you got to actually represent them. You can't just do state level or national issues. You have to do the issues that matter to them. The other side of that is it makes it very, very hard to corrupt them monetarily wise because there's more of them. And also because they're representing less people, it's much easier for all of us to say, no, you sold us out. We're done. We're not voting for you. If we can replicate that at a national level, that'd be great. Now, the problem is, I don't think our founding fathers foresaw us having, 360 million people. Um, but I would be happy to see us drop the number of constituents per representative to 400 or 500,000 people, which would give us closer to about 800 to 1,000 reps, which I think would be beneficial because then those reps would be more inclined to do what the voters and their constituents want versus what the big money donors want. Another benefit is we can also start having enough reps where we can have committees for every single department of the executive branch. So every 3 letter or 4 letter acronym in the executive branch, we can have a 3 to 5 person subcommittee on the House, specifically regulating their policies. This way, we get rid of this whole thing where we have the executive fiat, where the executive government can just, an agency can just decide one day, this is how we're doing it. That's not how our system works. The system works legislatively. It has to be given, the authority has to be given by the legislative branch, not by the executive branch. So if we can combine those two things where we have more reps and then we have little committees for every agency, it would go a long way to pulling back some of that executive overreach, go a long way to putting the power back in the hands of the people. And it'd also be much harder for them to gerrymander the districts and make them look all crazy if we
Yeah,
had.
yeah. Um, Victor, where can people find you?
Sure, yeah. So anyone who's looking for more information, you can check out my website, votevdo.com. I highly recommend everyone check it out. I also highly recommend anyone who wants to make a difference to go to my website and donate. Every dollar helps. $10 gets us a yard sign.
Awesome. Yep. VoteVDO.com.
Yep.
All right. Victor, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
You too.